Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and murder mysteries. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Tenebrae. This 1982 giallo follows an author promoting his new murder mystery novel in Rome, who finds himself being stalked by a serial killer obsessed with his work. Tenebrae was of course written and directed by the one and only Dario Argento. The last time we discussed this master of horror was in my review of Suspiria, but a few of his other classics include The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, The Cat O' Nine Tails, Deep Red, Phenomena, and Opera. Tenebrae was made in what most people consider to be Argento's prime, and it was a return to his giallo roots after going more supernatural with films like Suspiria and Inferno. I was surprised to learn that Argento's initial influences for making this film came from a few disturbing things going on in his own personal life. During a visit to America, he was actually stalked by an obsessed fan, and phone calls went from really friendly to eventually violent threats. During this time, a tourist at his hotel in LA was randomly shot to death, and Dario was really shaken by the amount of senseless, seemingly purposeless violence he was seeing. And sadly, that is a theme that has only gotten more and more relevant as time has gone on. But on a brighter note, Tenebrae has a baller fucking cast, if I do say so myself. The film stars Anthony Franciosa from A Hatful of Rain, Giuliano Gemma from The Leopard, Daria Nicolodi from Phenomena, and John Saxon from A Nightmare on Elm Street. As usual with Argento productions, cast members spoke a lot of different languages, so every single version of this film has a lot of dubbing. Cinematography was handled by Luciano Tovoli, who has also shot The Passenger, Titus, and Before and After. The score was made by Argento's favorite prog rock band, Goblin, and they once again add a fantastic atmosphere to this film. This score is very different from their one in Suspiria, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. Tenebrae was initially released to Italy and other European countries, but only after it was severely chopped up by censors. It also took a full 2 years before it reached America, where it was released under the title of Unsane. This version was even more chopped up, and apparently it was almost incomprehensible. The UK also added the film to their dreaded video nasties, and there has been a lot of debate on whether that had to do with the usual reasons like violence and gore, or if it had to do with the sexual nature of this film. Despite all of this, Tenebrae managed to eventually get some uncut releases, and it has remained an important film in both giallo as well as all of horror. It has a consistent 79 and 78% on Rotten Tomatoes, firmly rating it as one of Argento's strongest films. I've only seen Tenebrae once, and it was quite some time ago, so I'm excited to revisit this one. Thank you to my patron Olivia for requesting it for me to review. Better grab some black leather gloves, cause we're watching Tenebrae. The film opens on a man reading passages from Peter Neal's new book, which is also called Tenebrae. The text describes a tortured man who resorted to killing to quell his rage and find freedom. All of his shame could be swept away through the beautiful act of murder. That's kinda corny. Throw that shit in the fire and turn on some Goblin. This score is so much fun. We jump to the author, Peter Neal, as he bikes his way through the busy streets of New York all the way to Kennedy Airport. But Peter also had his luggage driven there, so I guess this was his last ride before filling up on pasta when he gets to Rome. He receives a call at the information desk and just leaves his bag unattended among a large group, and he's not thrilled to learn that the caller is his ex-fiancée Jane. It sounds like she's still hung up on him, but Peter couldn't care less. Maybe you should care a bit more, Pete, cause Jane is hiring people to tamper with your luggage. We hop over to Rome, where a woman named Elsa is being watched by a heavy-breathing POV. She decides to snag Neal's newest book, but security quickly shakes her down. Apparently she's a known shoplifter with 12 convictions, but she's able to get out of this one by promising to have sex with the excited officer. Elsa catches a ride to her neighborhood, which apparently has strange fenced-in areas with rapey homeless men. Seriously, what is this weird fence thing? She kicks the creep in the nuts, but he keeps on chasing her, but she's able to get inside her gated apartment complex. She makes it inside where her phone doesn't seem to be working, and after being scared by the would-be rapist again, she is grabbed by a mostly unseen attacker. The whispering, leather glove wearing attacker holds a razor to her neck as he rips pages from Tenebrae and stuffs them into her mouth. Once she's good and stuffed, he slashes her throat, and he takes a few pics for his collection. Peter has finally landed, and he is met by a crowd of reporters, including a friend named Tilda, as well as his agent Bulmer. As Peter completes a press release about the new book, the killer makes his way into Neil's apartment building and slides a letter under his door. Tilda claims that Tenebrae is a deeply sexist novel with weak female victims and hunky male heroes, and she asks why he hates women. Peter disagrees with her take, and she keeps pushing for answers, but Bulmer steps in and sets up a one-on-one interview at a later time. It seems Tilda and Peter are still on good terms despite this tough questioning, and please notice this guy while John Saxon shows off his new hat. Outside, we learn that Peter's assistant Anne has been working hard to create hype for Tenebrae here in Italy, and we'll meet her in a sec. Peter also asks about the tall mustache guy that was silent during the interviews, and Bulmer shares that he's a television book reviewer named Cristiano Berti. Peter already has a personal interview scheduled with Berti in a few days. Anne rolls up with a young employee of Bulmer's named Gianni, who will work as his second assistant and chauffeur during his stay in Rome. Peter finally looks in his damn bag to find ink poured on his clothes, and a watch he bought for Anne has been smashed. The three arrive at Peter's new apartment and are surprised to find a detective named Germani waiting for them. Apparently the door was open, so Germani and his partner Altieri let themselves in, and they share the news about Elsa's murder. This is Peter's first time in Rome, so he ensures that he has no connection to this crime. He also has an alibi since he only landed 2 hours ago, and Germani starts chugging scotch. Turns out the detective is a fan of his books, and he's quickly making his way through Tenebrae as well. He tells Peter that just like in Tenebrae, the victim was murdered with a straight razor. Combine that with the pages stuffed in her mouth and the letter the killer slid under the door, and things are looking a little fishy. A ransom-style note quotes the passage we read in the opening, and Germani believes he'll be receiving more letters in the future. Peter isn't sure he'll be much help, but he does share the damage to his luggage in case it could be relevant. But way better than that, Peter gets a call from the killer himself. Germani hops on another phone to listen in as the killer whispers about how Tenebrae taught him how to kill, and he reveals he's watching them at this very moment. Peter accidentally spooks the caller before Germani and Altieri can catch him though. Time to get a sneak peek into the killer's mind, which is shown with all the visual flair you'd expect from Argento. Looks like as a young man, he found himself on a beach with a woman hoping to get gangbanged? I guess our guy is a prude and slapped the woman? And he is run down by the other guys? The woman spits blood on him, kicks him, and shoves her whole damn heel into his mouth. So I guess that's our killer's origin story. We rejoin Tilda with her girlfriend Marion, who is currently trying to open up their relationship. Tilda doesn't like it, but allows Marion to take a man home to their place, and she hangs around the bar for an extra hour to ensure the man is gone when she gets home. Looks like Tilda is not cut out for an open relationship, and the drunken Marion worsens the situation by describing how great it was. Tilda hears a noise outside, and we're treated to a 2.5 minute long take that slowly floats up the giant brutalist home. We get to appreciate the architecture while also taking on the role of the peeping Tom killer, who is in the process of breaking in. Tilda can't hear the bolt cutters due to Marion's music, and the killer strikes while she is changing her shirt. Tilda gets slashed and knocks over a vase, which captures the attention of Marion and her Julius Caesar cosplay. The killer cuts the lights as she finds Tilda's body, and cuts Marion's neck as well. It wouldn't be an Argento film without some shattered glass now, would it? Huh, is this where Halloween Kills got the idea for Cameron's death? We get a peek into the killer's hideaway where he processes his own photos and washes his dirty little knife. Peter's landlord sends his daughter Maria to fix Neil's water heater, and Anne picks up on some uncomfortable, flirty energy. The killer also pops in to drop off another letter. Peter finds it and searches for the sender, but he is already long gone. The letter says, "So passes the glory of Lesbos," which both hints at his larger interest in literature, as well as the fact he just killed some lesbians. Autopsies have determined that the same razor was used to kill Elsa, and Germani doesn't think Maria's hookup had anything to do with it. Peter meets with Bertie to discuss their live interview, and he is way too excited and focused on the book's themes around sexual deviancy. Peter argues that the killer in his book is driven by what he views as perverse, but that doesn't mean that he as the author or we as the audience should agree with him. Peter doesn't think this very dark discussion would make for great daytime television, and Bertie admits that he's mostly interested on a personal level. The detectives arrive at the studio, but Bulmer pulls them aside so as not to distract Peter, and Germani tells the agent that these murders are a tribute to his client. He later tells Peter that he's never able to guess the killer in his books, and Peter wonders if the killer is someone he knows. Gianni heads out for a night on the town with Maria, and Pete spots his ex-lover driving by. Anne suspects it was she who damaged his luggage, and this has Peter wondering what else she may be capable of. We rejoin the killer as he leaves his ridiculously lavish home, as he's on the look for a prostitute named Juliana. He finds her on the street, but she's pulled away by a customer, so it looks like he'll have to make do with Maria. You know those scenes where the victim is scared by a dog only to be attacked by the killer moments later? This is kind of like that, except poor fucking Maria is actually chased down and attacked by the Doberman. It seriously goes on for like 3 full minutes, and of course it leaves Maria seeking shelter inside of the killer's home. That is some shit luck. She finds her way to his workstation, and that damn dog is still after her. Maria realizes the homeowner probably isn't on the up and up, but before she can escape with evidence, the killer returns and finds her. She manages to relieve him of his razor, but he just picks up a nearby axe. We chase Maria down as the killer's POV, and she is killed with several chops to the torso. That morning the body is found, and Peter has received a new letter. The killer speaks of how he'll rid the world of perverts, and Germani warns that this killer is getting closer and closer to Neil himself. He tells Peter to stay at his apartment at all times, and also mentions that Tenebre's killer ended up being very predictable. While going through the notes with Anne and Gianni, Peter recalls that Bertie had similar ideas to the killer during their interview. Peter realizes Bertie only lives 3 blocks away, and he quickly takes a liking to the idea of catching the killer himself. He and Gianni decide to stake out Bertie's home, and Anne finds Jane lurking outside of Peter's apartment. We get an odd zoom in on this reflective sculpture, which I'll explain once we finish the breakdown. Du Bois make it to Bertie's and set up shop in his yard, and it looks like the killer is destroying any and all evidence of his crimes. They split up to get more vantage points, and Gianni watches as the lights are turned off on Bertie. The book reviewer watches in terror as somebody drives an axe into his head, although Gianni couldn't see who it was. Gianni finds Peter has been bonked with a rock, and the only info he can provide was that Bertie knew the killer. He believes he heard the killer confess to all of the other murders before offing Bertie, but he isn't too sure. Peter decides not to go to the cops and not to return to New York until this blows over? Okay. Anne, I hope you make it. You are the only voice of reason around here. Ah, come on, Anne. I literally just gave you a compliment. We return to the killer's origin story, and it looks like he stalked Red Heel Lady and eventually stabbed her to death. Peter tells Bulmer that he's thinking of leaving Rome, but as you'd expect, the slippery agent convinces him to stay a bit longer for money reasons. Oh yeah, it also turns out that Bulmer and Jane are madly in love, so I guess that's why she's in Rome after all. Another red herring bites the dust, I guess. Gianni is so shaken up from the murder that he's causing accidents, so Peter opts to meet with Germani at Bertie's home on foot. Germani believes this is the work of the same killer, but also notes that the last 2 murders have been with an axe instead of the previous razor. He's also found a ton of writing about Peter that Bertie had made since he arrived, and Peter convinces the detective his head wound is nothing of importance. The two agree that they are missing a piece to this puzzle, but once they find it, this case will be solved. Peter decides to quote Sherlock Holmes, saying once they've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. He also tells Germani he's finally leaving town, but I'm not sure I buy that. Meanwhile, Jane gets a questionable present, and if you don't think that ridiculous sculpture will be used to kill someone, you are definitely mistaken. Bulmer is waiting for Jane at a plaza for lunch, and he notices a few moments of violence break out. Thanks to these distractions, the killer sneaks up on Bulmer, and he is shanked a bunch of times in the tummy. Damn, he didn't even go out with his hat on. Jane arrives but quickly flees, so maybe she still is on the suspect list. Anne has booked a hotel in Paris for Peter, and he says farewell to Gianni. Peter maybe gets on a plane, and Gianni returns to the crime scene to see if he can remember any details he originally blocked out. Looks like you've got company though, Gianni. The trip does prove successful, as now he recalls that it was actually Bertie that confessed to the murders. But if Bertie was the murderer, who murdered him? Gianni finds out the hard way, as he only gets a glimpse of the killer while being strangled to death in his car. Is that a different axe, or did the cops just leave the murder weapon there? Anne gets a call from Jane, who rambles about doing something bad and having two sides fighting within her, and Anne agrees to come over to her apartment. Altieri interviews Bulmer's maid, who informs her of Jane and Bulmer's secret love story, and Germani heads to the latest crime scene. Jane is maybe contemplating suicide, but don't worry, Queen, the killer would be happy to assist you. Oh wow, that is a top tier blood spray right there. Jane is killed off screen, and we learn the red heels mailed to her might actually belong to the killer's first victim. The killer shuts off the lights as a car pulls up, and Detective Altieri is immediately chopped down. We're finally introduced to the new killer, and it is none other than Peter Neal. Germani and Anne find him in this inescapable position, and the detective is sad that this improbability ended up being the truth. Peter says that once he realized Bertie was the killer, the story started writing itself, as the Razor Killer could take the fall for his own revenge against Bulmer and Jane. So it wasn't Peter that left Jane like the movie wanted us to believe, she left him for Bulmer. Germani prepares to arrest the author, but Peter whips out a razor and fucking slits his own throat. Well, that was certainly a turn of events. The movie ends with Germani and Anne driving away to safety. Y'all, this is the part where you roll the credits, drive into the sunset, you know? No? Okay, I guess we're still doing this. Germani tells Anne about the beach girl killing, which Peter was accused of but never charged with. This murder haunted Neal and led to his successful career, but his beliefs of overcoming his own obstacles with violence eventually made their way into his writing. Germani runs back inside, only to find Peter has vanished. Apparently he was packing a prop knife with realistic fake blood sprays, and Germani is also finished off with an axe to the back. The ruckus does knock that sculpture against the door though, so when Anne re-enters, one of the spikes goes flying into Peter's torso. Now the movie actually ends as Pete slowly bleeds out and Anne screams her fucking head off. And that's Tenebrae. This probably goes without saying, but this is a visually stunning film, which is always to be expected when it's in Argento. The colors here are much more natural than that of Suspiria or Inferno, which helps keep it planted more in reality than those supernatural films, but there are still a ton of funky camera angles and visual metaphors that help us stay glued to the screen. I've mentioned it already, but I love this score even more with the second watch, and it's definitely going to go onto my Halloween playlist. It also has all the stuff you'd expect from a giallo film. You've got bright red blood, black leather gloves, a straight razor for a weapon, and an ever-shifting mystery you're not supposed to solve because the truth is downright bizarre. I can't think of any other films with this exact kind of twist within the murder mystery. Killing off your original killer to make the protagonist a new killer is just a very fun subversion of expectations. And just to recap, Bertie did kill everyone up until his own death, which was completed by Peter. That shiny sculpture represented a shift in the story as we began watching Peter succumb to his darker desires. I do have trouble believing anybody was truly shocked by the Peter reveal, but that doesn't really bother me as I think his character becoming the killer is way more satisfying than any of the random side characters. It's also super interesting to me that this story came from Argento, considering all of the socio-political aspects it contains. A lot of Argento's work does have political undertones, but Tenebre directly tackles critiques and issues people had been having with horror at the time. We all know that the 80s were the heyday for companies like the MPAA to spew rhetoric around the need for moral purity within film and other entertainment, and it's just so ironic that a horror film tackling those issues ended up on the video nasties. Most films that use the talking point of whether or not horror can influence its viewers to become violent or not usually has a strong message that that is not the case, but Argento has a little more fun with it than that. Berti was reenacting murders from Tenebre, so to an extent that point is proven correct. But there is also more nuance to it than that, as Berti had a lot of hang-ups with his Catholic upbringing. The books may have told him how to do it, but his own repression is what gave him the why. He was always going to snap, but he just happened to find a book that he could twist into his own narrative. Argento also plays into personal critiques and accusations he's faced as a director, which is seen most directly in the scene where Tilda confronts Peter about the sexism in his books. Peter almost works as a surrogate for Dario, which makes it even more surprising that the character was the violent monster he so calmly denied being. I'm still a little bit puzzled about what exactly happened on that beach. I can't tell where his original intention for killing came from. I assume it was similar to Berti in that he was too sexually ashamed to have a beach orgy, and the humiliation he faced that day turned him to rage. But the final twist that Peter is actually seeking revenge on Bulmer and Jane feels a little bit disjointed from everything else. Germani describes Peter as insane despite the fact that he has a pretty logical reason for killing, although he does go completely batshit by the end. Despite a lot of violence throughout the entire film, Tenebre does feel a little bit more like a slow burn, but trust me when I say the last 20 minutes of that fever dream is completely worth it. Most of the kills here are pretty strong, but they really went all out for Jane's death. But where I usually find some inconsistencies in Argento's writing, I also find a ton of genius in his filmmaking process. The long shot of Tilda's apartment required a crane and a shit ton of scaffolding, and it really is an incredible shot to capture without any digital assistance. The scene where Peter appears from directly behind Germani also might be the very first time that form of camera blocking was used, and that's something that gets duplicated all the time now. There is also a very intentional use of doubling and reflecting imagery throughout the film, which helps forewarn the viewer of the dual killers and motives. Also, Argento has described the film as taking place in the near future after some sort of global event left the world much emptier. I don't think I ever got there with the film, but I definitely picked up on the hyper-stylized city that Rome is being portrayed as. Every location in the film is filled with fences, walls, and brutalist architecture that simultaneously feels beautiful but dangerous. Tenebre has a very different feeling than Suspiria, but I was still able to completely engross myself into the story. Peter's ultimate death via sculpture was a little bit disappointing, as it was a pretty passive way for him to go, but it also plays into the themes of art causing violence. All in all though, Tenebre is not only a strong giallo, but it's a strong horror movie with all things considered. It has a complex story that'll keep you guessing, a couple standout kills, and a visually and audibly mesmerizing effect at times. I don't think it quite reached the level that Suspiria did for me, but it's definitely a film I'll check out in the future. Thank you again to my patron Olivia for requesting Tenebre for me to review. I had a lot of fun with it. Well, that's about it. Join me in 2 weeks as we check out Paul Verhoeven's Hollow Man. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Tenebre. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.